hot tent stoves. There's a lot to talk about on this one, guys. Stick around, we'll get right into it. Alright, welcome back to the channel, guys. So I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible, but it's probably going to be a longer video. I don't got a lot of daylight left, so I want to get right into it. Can't guarantee I'll get it all done before the sun goes down, but I really wanted to make this video. It's been a long time coming. I've had all three of these out on plenty of adventures, and I can tell you they're all good stoves, but they're all meant for a different purpose, and I learned quite a few things along the way using them. So I want to get into the different types of stoves that you should be looking at, what you should be thinking about depending on what kind of adventure you're trying to do. You know, going over the different reasons you would want to have this stove versus this one and versus this one. What key characteristics make them perfect for the situation that I use them for. So let's get to it. Alright guys, so this first style stove is this titanium Wild West stove. This stove I bought, it was my first one. I wanted something versatile, something that was going to be able to work in pretty much any condition, and I kind of figured lighter was the best way to go. Initially I really liked, and after a while, after upgrading or changing out to some of these other stoves, I've come to realize that it's not quite my style, but it is really good for people who are trying to do things like canoe camping. I was originally going to use this for backpacking. The problem is this lightweight setup, it takes quite a bit of work, and there's some failure points that I want to point out. The first thing that you're going to want to know about a setup like this with these titanium stoves, specifically with the Wild West, is that it's got quite a bit of parts to it. So you've got to keep all these washers and different nuts and, you know, different pieces together in order to put this together out in the field. It kind of slides together, and you can see it's not hard to put in there initially, but the problem is these warp. The sidings warp quite a bit, so it doesn't stay straight, and they bend, but they don't stay where you want them to be. So when you go to set this stove up, you're going to have quite a lot of trouble trying to get it to fit right. Yeah, so the warping, you've got these to set up, and then this style stove comes with a roll-out chimney. And what you do is you roll this out and then roll it back up, so that way it's long, and you fit it on top inside this. Now, the issue with that is when the wind blows this, it moves immediately. There's not much holding this in its spot. The other thing with this setup is that you've got to feed the fire pretty much all night long if you plan on having a fire all night. So every hour and a half, you got to feed it. It's not efficient at all. It draws a lot of air, and it's not sealed. So if you don't watch it, you could end up having some smoke in the tent and having some issues with air quality. This setup's really good for somebody going out to like 25-degree weather, you know, 20-degree, up to 35, 40, you know, basically staying in that range where, yeah, it's cold enough to justify having one out, but it's more of a luxury item in my opinion. Once it gets much colder than 25 degrees or so, you're getting into that real cold temperatures where you're going to have snow on the ground, and that's when I'm going to use one of these other bigger stoves that are much better quality. They're much more efficient and much safer too. But this is great for canoe camping or something like that. I do want to say the Wild West version of this is not my favorite. I'm going to show you something that I think is pretty cool. Alright guys, so this is not a stove. It's something that it's an oven that is made by Winterwell, and I haven't used it yet, so I'm not going to speak to its design and how well it works, but I do want to show you guys this as an option. Camanis makes a lot of their stoves with this fast fold system, where it's got these easy to deploy systems. There's no hardware. You just got to open it up, and then what you do is you line these up, and you just click them into where they got to go. See that? And what's cool about that is you don't have to worry about losing the nuts and the bolts and everything that goes with that other system. So if I'm going to get a new titanium setup, I would highly recommend looking into something like this. I can't say I foolproof tested it, but I really think that that it should work, and it's got a better system. I don't like knowing that I can lose washers and bolts and things, and then I can't set up my stove, especially if I am relying on it. Where this excels, I believe, is going to be your shoulder season, early spring, late fall, when the temps are at about 30 degrees. It's cold, but yet not terribly cold. You can get away without having to use this if you need to. If it's too windy and this is going to get blown around, or you lose a part, or it doesn't go together right and you get smoked out, if something fails on it, you're not dead in the water. You can still enjoy the trip. This next stove is made by Winterwell, and it's stainless steel. It's more robust. It does not pack down like that other stove, but what it lacks in being able to pack down, it does a good job in being robust and actually useful out in the field. This stainless steel will last a lifetime. It will also be able to be heated up and really use the firewood that you gather a ton better. And it's got a lot more thermal mass to it, so you can fill a bigger tent up with heat, and you don't have to feed it quite as often as that smaller one. That other one, maybe an hour at night, you got to feed it. This guy, 2-3 hours you might be able to get out of a good burn in here and stay relatively warm. You'll notice right off the bat that it's still got that window in the front, which is nice, but it's also got a window on the side to use. Now, they make other setups with the titanium that have these windows as well, and I would suggest getting those, not because it's necessarily because of the ambiance, but because, believe it or not, having that glass there on the titanium stoves will help keep it from bending. The titanium bends quite a lot. Alright, so if we open it up here, you can see that it actually stores everything right in here. The pipe actually feeds in there and is sturdy. That's not flimsy like that other setup. So when this gets hit with wind, and I've had quite a lot of wind hit it in the past, it doesn't go anywhere as easy. This is much more reliable of a setup in inclement weather, in my opinion. The other thing you get with a setup like this is you start getting into actually having a top for these, where you've got a way of stopping rain from getting in. And I've got these tie outs here, so that way I can button this down, mainly to trees or something like that, but you can also stake it out to the ground as well. The other thing you're going to get by upgrading to a bigger stove, and a stove that's stainless steel, and one that you don't have to put together, is a lot of times you're going to have these extras where I've got some trays on the side, and these are great. You can cook on the surface, move things to the side when you're done, and then move them back whenever you need. So I really like having the stands on the side. One of the features I don't like about this stove, that for whatever reason a lot of other people do, is this. So you can cook directly over the fire here, but in my opinion, I've never done it really. It doesn't really add much value. I don't like it. I'm sure other people do. I personally just view that as another spot that I can allow a draft in. But what I love about this stove is this. This is the water. You can fill that up with water, and then you heat it up around the stove. So it actually fits around this pipe. When you're done, you grab it off of that. You move this to the side. And then you can put that back. And then you've got your spout right here. I love that. Love it, love it. And then the last thing that I got for this setup that I have not had to use yet, but I think is well worth it, is this insulated pipe. So if you got a tent that you think is going to be a little risky getting close to the side of it, and you want to keep that heat from, you know, basically burning it down, add one of these guys right before it goes through the opening, and this will protect the inside of your tent. So pretty nice to have. All right, guys, I'm losing light here. I'm going to try and get through this. This is the last setup that I have. This is the Caminus. It's from Russian Bear Market. It's a medium. They sell a large, but I don't think you'd ever need a large unless you've got an absolutely ginormous tent. I absolutely love this stove. It has pretty much every feature you would want. All right, first thing is you got these sides here, and if you take them off, set them to the side, they reveal a big glass door. You can see this one's all gummed up from my last adventure. I got to get that cleaned off, but for the most part they get gummed back up anyway. So I usually let a nice hot burn go, and then it eats away at it, and you get just a little bit of that ambiance. The other thing is I really like is this door. So the old setup for this door did not work very well. They had like some weird configuration, but I got the upgraded version where it's an actual door, and this is how you get your airflow. Open this up, and it's got everything in there. Got your pipe. These are the legs. I didn't put the legs on there for sake of time. All right, so you'll notice that this has the pipe in the front, and that's because this actually has a baffle inside of it. So underneath this top layer, underneath here, is a baffle that goes all the way down, and it seals this all the way up to this point right here. And when the heat is going, when you got your fire over here, it takes extra time to let that burn up and through here, and then all along this baffle, and then back out. That does two things. One, it gives you another burn chamber to get extra heat out of your wood source. And then two, you have a much higher likelihood that you're going to burn up the wood completely so you don't get any embers. Because one of the biggest things that you're going to find when you're out winter camping and you've got a stove going is you are worried about those embers. They will chew up whatever tent you have. They go up out of this, and they're not quite burnt up all the way. All right, now this is what goes on the very top. So if for some reason that gets through there, a lot of times this will stop it from coming out and hitting the tent, because it's guarded all the way around. So as your ember comes up, it hits either this or it hits the top right there. And instead of having all those little holes, you've got this big giant opening. And what that does is it allows the soot to build up without blocking airflow, because a lot of times that's a failure point in these stoves, is you will fill up enough of that soot. Here's an example. You will fill up these little channels here, and all of a sudden you won't be able to get air coming out of your draft. Now this is a good version of it. You can see it's got buildup of soot, but it's so long that by the time you build this all the way up, you will have been able to empty it out. Not all of them are like that, so keep that in mind. If you've only got that many rings before it stops being able to let smoke out, that's a problem. That's a failure point. All right, now another thing I want you to pay close attention to is the pipes. The pipes on this have these perforated edges, and what that does is when you put this in there, it will lock in, but when you've got to take it out, it comes out easy. Now this Winterwell setup, when you put this together, it's in there. It's locked in there, which is good. That's what you want. But man, once you add, in fact, I can't even get it off without the heat. So that's something to keep in mind. These perforated edges really help this to come unlock from each other after it's been burning for a weekend, where it's super hot and it's almost melded together or welded together. This will come off real easy. These ones, I've actually had one adventure where I just packed it up to the side of it because I could not get them apart. That's another thing to keep in mind. When you're out in the field, you've got to worry about contingency plans like that. When something doesn't tear down right or go together right, you've got to know that you're still going to be all right out there. All right, now underneath this setup, I have this tray. This tray and this bottom, when the legs are on there, that will help keep any amount of heat from burning anything underneath. Now, I do carry a heat-proof mat that goes underneath all my stoves, but having this little buffer zone is awesome. You can still heat up wood underneath if you're trying to dry it out, but at the same time not worry about it catching a blaze. Furthermore, this tray is great because over time you're going to build up quite a bit of embers in there, and at the end of the adventure you need to clear that out. You got to have a way to empty it out. I have used this. It is thinner material than I would like, and it does heat up. In my opinion, this can be one of the big improvements that they could have. I personally think I may start bringing a bucket because this is my car camping setup anyway, so having another bucket is no big deal to carry out there. Now the one thing that I really don't care for much is this water system. This was made originally where when you put both of these up together, you can put rocks in the middle and then make your tent into a sauna, which I haven't done. Maybe it's something that you would want to do. I personally don't think that it's got any value to me. If I'm going to do that, I'll just go to the gym. But when I'm out in the field, I'm using it as a heat source, not a sauna. Although there's a lot of people out on the season of Alone, for whatever reason, they got to make some sort of sauna and then they quit, usually the next episode. So, I don't know. Food for thought. Now, the advantage that these do have is I usually imagine the tent's back here. I usually make it so that way this is facing the middle and this is facing the edge of the tent, and this will block some of that heat from hitting the wall of the tent so it doesn't heat up and start to burn through. So yeah, if you're going to use it as a sauna, that's why they have this big massive water tank, and it fits nicely in there. You can actually use this as a shelf if you wanted. If you wanted to heat something up on top of there. But I have found this ineffective because you can fill this completely up and there's no way to stop it from the water just evaporating, and then it stinks to try to fill back up. So I don't like the design. I think it's nice that they added some functionality with the sauna, for some folks, but it's not worth it to me. The best water supply source is definitely the Winterwell. All right, guys, so those are my 3 setups. So now I want to kind of go over more broadly what you should look at, what you should be thinking about before you go out and actually buy your stove. because that's really what this video is about, is to try to give you a bird's eye view of everything, so that way you can decide what stove you want to get, or at least know kind of what area to look at. And then you can compare and contrast, your particular stoves that you have available to you, and decide based on some of these features. So the first and main thing you're obviously going to need to look at is the size and weight. You can't take a Winterwell or that Caminus stove out backpacking. It's not possible. Now, me personally, I'm not taking a hot tent backpacking. I will take a hot tent out on a sled for pulking, but I'm not going to take that out backpacking. I have found that it takes work, too much effort. I mean, the ambiance is kind of nice, but ultimately, if I'm backpacking, I'm not taking a stove with me. I'm going to rely on the gear I'm wearing, my clothing, and my sleep system to keep me warm. Now, if I'm canoe camping, I would consider taking the stove out for canoe camping. I think at that point, you're not worried so much about weight. You don't have to really carry these things in. It really doesn't limit you much. And you can bring extra gear in case something does fail. And so for that reason, I would try that titanium stove. I could see myself packing that up for a nice hot tent adventure, and only using it at nighttime to cook my food, heat up water, that kind of thing. It might be worth it. You start getting into the heavier gear, and you get into pulking. Now, I think pulking is where the hot tent really is excellent. You can put that medium-sized stove on a pulk and pull it, and it doesn't weigh as much as you'd think. You can get away with that big stove and be pretty comfortable. And it's got enough feature, it's got enough safety points, it's really solid. You can rely on that in the backcountry to keep you warm. So when you're working hard, and it's hard work pulking, and you set up camp, you can set up a base camp and know that when you go out adventuring and you get all sweaty and cold and everything, when you come back, you can have a nice hot stove to dry out in the hot tent and relax at night, especially where you have multiple people all sharing a hot tent and you each have the different gear packed up on your sleds. You can work as a team, and then you're really doing well. And then the last big stove that I have, that's for car camping only. I personally find car camping to be enjoyable in the wintertime. Not so much usually in the summer, too many people, and I just don't care to camp around a lot of people. But wintertime, there's not as many people out there. In fact, 99.9% of the time, I've never seen anybody else winter camping when I go out. So that's the benefit of willing to go out in the cold and get a hot tent set up. Now, the other thing that you're going to want to pay close attention to is, or think about, is wind. So if you're going to go out into an area that is out on a lake and you're worried about that breeze or that wind coming through, or it's going to be real cold and windy out, that hot tent setup, in my opinion, if you have the titanium setup, it's not worth it. And the reason why I say that is because as soon as that wind picks up, that stove at any point could fall over, or the chimney can fall over, and then you've just got smoke coming into your tent. I personally am not going to sleep like that, and I'm not going to enjoy the adventure like that. Now, if you have the Winterwell set up, that stovepipe will stay on there with some wind, and that's worthwhile having. Now, if it gets too gusty out there, you're going to want to turn it off, which leads me to my other point. When you set up your hot tenting gear and your items that you're going to take with you, make sure your sleeping gear is rated for whatever weather you will be sleeping in. Don't bring something expecting that stove to keep you warm all night. You should expect for it to fail, plan for it to fail, and then you'll be much better positioned if you do run into a storm-like condition where you can't run that stove at night. The other thing to keep in mind is those smaller stoves, the titanium stoves, in my opinion, are not worthwhile at all to run at night. That titanium stove is too small, the firebox is too small, and you can't get a long burn. An hour and a half tops. And if that's the case, it's not worth it. Plan on sleeping in the cold and using your stove for that evening time, because it gets dark early and it is nice to have a stove running for you to be hanging out with people in your hot tent, nice and warm, you know, kicking back and relaxing after an adventure, and then letting that stove burn out and going to sleep. The medium-sized stove, that Winterwell, that'll work for about 3 hours. It's worth it, in my opinion. You can, basically feed it, let it run for 3, maybe 4 hours, and then heat it back, fill it back up, and then let it burn out into the morning time, and you'll be waking up shortly, ready to start that fire back up for your morning. The Caminus stove, that stove is worthwhile filling up with wood and letting it burn all night, pretty much all winter long. That thing is super safe, super reliable, and you can really damper that down because it's sealed up. It's sealed up, so you don't have any draft issues. And because of that, you can really rely on dampering it down to where it's only getting a little bit of air. The other thing is you want to pair your hot tent with the stove that you decide to go with. Don't get yourself a tent that's going to be ultra light and then get a super heavy Caminus stove. They don't pair well, because what you're expecting to use the ultralight tent for, you're not going to use with that big stove, and vice versa. A good example of this is my brother. He's got a tent that I'm real excited for, and a really good setup. I think it's going to work out good for him because his tent is capable of really nasty weather. It's going to be hopefully as strong as my Russian bear market tent, but yet his takes longer to set up, but is packable. And it's also about half the weight. And so what that allows him to do is be able to pair that with a medium-sized stove like my Winterwell and go and basically pulk with that setup. And when he can pulk with that setup, now he can use that for base camping, he can use it for pulking, he can use it for all of the adventures he wants to do. And I really think that that's a smart buy. It's what I was originally going to buy until I wanted to get an ultra heavy duty setup for me and my wife, because she wanted to experience winter camping, and I felt it was worthwhile to invest in a true car camping setup for me and my family. But I'm excited to see what's going to come from my brother's setup. Appreciate you guys sticking around. I know it was a long video. I hope it was helpful. I know I wanted to hear, when I first got into hot tent camping, I wanted to see what my options were and what the pros and cons of them were and what the real expectations of them are. Because when you watch people's videos of them utilizing the gear, they make it look like it worked out perfectly, but sometimes it's a false assumption. I definitely know I learned quite a bit in my adventures from trying out my smaller stove and working my way up to my large. So I hope it was useful to somebody out there. Till next time, guys, get out there and camp.